What's going on, my good people? Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining us on another FCP Euro DIY. Today we're going to be working on a 2018 BMW F82 M4. Today on the M4, we're going to be installing a CSF intercooler radiator upgrade. This is a dual row system versus a single core system that comes on the vehicle stock. They're really susceptible to heat soaking, considering that they are sandwiched in a three-piece unit. You have your intercooler, you have your AC condenser, and your radiator. So this is going to be a nice upgrade for the F82. It's also going to be providing 20% more cooling capacity, and it holds a little bit more coolant as well. This DIY is going to be applicable to your F80, your F82, your F83, and your F87, of course, S55 drivetrains. Now, with that being said, what's cool about this unit is not only is it going to fit the stock setup on the vehicle, you don't really have to change anything or upgrade any brackets or anything like that, but it also comes with a rock guard. So this will help keep some debris out of these units, and considering that this is the first piece in the line of the three-piece unit, it really helps kind of protect everything behind it. It also comes with some hardware for this grill piece as well. Now, to do this DIY, we're going to have to remove the front bumper. So if you're looking on how to just remove your front bumper, whether to upgrade something or replace something, this DIY is going to come in handy. Before we get started on this DIY, I just want to remind you all these parts are available on fcpeuro.com, and of course they're protected by our lifetime replacement guarantee. Now let's take a look at some of the tools we're going to need for this DIY. For this job, we're going to need a flashlight, a flathead screwdriver, a Phillips head screwdriver. Those are going to be depending on the hardware that's holding on your bumper, shields, and lip if applicable. We have a small pick, and then from my left to right, we have a T25, we have a T30, a T45, an 8mm socket, that's going to be our best friend today, a 10mm socket, a 13, and a 16 as well. For some of the plastic rivets we're going to encounter, I like to use some pliers. I have two different extensions, one for my 3/8 drive and one for my 1/4 inch drive. I have a 1/4 inch drive ratchet, a 3/8 drive ratchet, and then a nice to have but not necessary is an electric ratchet, and then a torque wrench for some of the hardware that we encounter. Now, one thing not pictured here but needed is going to be a catch pan for some of the coolant. We're going to be working on the lift today, otherwise a jack and jack stands is going to be necessary. And then something that I didn't mention at the beginning, but it's definitely going to be needed, is some BMW coolant. Make sure you have some handy. The amount is not a lot, but you'll definitely need some. All of these things will be linked in the description below. Now we know what tools we're working with, let's go ahead and get started on this DIY. What's going on, my good people? Under the hood of the M4, we're going to give you a layout of the land before we get started. We're going to start by draining the cooling system first, and for that we're going to want to remove the cap off the expansion tank. Now this system does run on its own cooling system, if you will, so it's nice we don't have to really bother the engine side of things too much. It's going to have its own expansion tank up here. This is the one for the main cooling system for the engine over here, so this we do not need to touch. This one we're going to go ahead and remove the cap. Set it off to the side. I'm going to put this on my tool cart. And then from there, we're going to head underneath the vehicle to start removing some of the paneling underneath so we can access our auxiliary water pump and drain the system a bit there. So let's get to it. All right, my good people, we're working on the lift today under the M4 just to make our lives a little bit easier. However, this is a job you can totally do in the driveway or in the garage at home. This car is equipped with a carbon fiber package, so we're going to start by removing the carbon fiber lip underneath our front bumper. And we're just going to work on removing all the paneling under here that we need to A, remove the bumper, and B, get to our auxiliary water pump. So to get started, our carbon fiber lip in particular is held on with a combination of Phillips head screwdrivers and 8mm hardware. Yours may vary depending on how and who installed it. So we're going to start by removing 6 Phillips head screws, and then we'll transition over to our 8mm bolts. Now, I could probably remove the front bumper with the lip on there. However, I don't want to risk damaging it, so it's easier just to take it off, set everything to the side individually so you don't hurt any of the plastics. All right, with those removed, I have 1, 2, hopefully just 2 8mm bolts holding the rest of this lip on. So we'll remove those, and then we'll go from there. Using a 8mm on the electric ratchet just to speed up the process. This one had a little bit of adhesive on it, doing really nothing. We'll go ahead and set this to the side. All right, with that removed, now we can work on removing these 2 end pieces. They're kind of like pork chow stop paneling. They are held on by 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 millimeters on the front and 2 on the interior on the fender liner. So using our 8 millimeter socket, we'll remove both on either side. In addition to that, one we missed that I want to mention now before we continue is there is an 8 millimeter on either end, on either corner of the wheel liners that also hold these chops in place. So I suggest you can either take the wheel off or just rotate it if you have the whole front end lifted up so you can get to them. So we're going to do that right now. There's one. Now we'll go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. Also a good opportunity to kind of clean out your liners. You can see there's a lot of rock and debris in there. All right, next we can remove this center shield right here. Now it's held on by a couple 8 millimeters as well as 2 13 millimeter bolts, or you can use a T40 as well on these 2 forward ones. So we're going to stick with our normal sockets for now. Hit it with the 13. Next, we're going to work on removing our stiffening plate. It's held on by 9 8 millimeter bolts. Now with those 8 millimeter bolts removed, we have a total of 8 16 millimeter bolts to remove as well. So let's get started with that. What I did just now is break the rest of them free with a 3/8 drive ratchet, as my little Milwaukee can't handle the torque. And we can go ahead and remove this and set it to the side. All right, now that we have access to our auxiliary water pump, we're going to go ahead and drain the coolant from it by disconnecting our coolant hose running to it. It has a quick disconnect. We're going to use a right angle pick to release our lock, and then we'll work the hose off. We use a small flathead screwdriver to kind of help work the connector off the auxiliary pump, as these typically don't ever come off very easily. Obviously, you don't want to break anything. Be very gentle where you're prying. There we go. I just need a little encouragement. We're going to give that a few minutes to drain, clean up a little bit, and we'll come back in a minute. All right, now that our line's happy and empty, we can go ahead and hook it back up to our pump. Make sure that your quick disconnect clip is still disengaged so that it doesn't get in the way of you putting the hose back on. Before we lock it in, we have to make sure it's fully seated. So you can see we still have a little bit of the neck showing, so we have to work it in a little bit more. That felt promising. Sure enough, it's nice and flush. Push our locking tab back in, and that's nice and secure. I'm going to wipe down the area, and then we'll move on from there. All right, now we're going to work on removing the hardware on the wheel well side of things. So as you remember earlier, we removed the corner pieces when we were removing our pork chops. Next, we have 2 more 8 millimeter bolts to get to, so let's go ahead and do that. Just using the electric ratchet and the 8 millimeter socket. There's 2. And then inside of here, we're going to pull back the fender liner a little bit. There's going to be some hardware that mates the bumper to the fender. So we have 2 8 millimeter bolts that hold the bumper to the fender. You want to make sure you remove those. Those are tucked behind the fender liner. And then if you work your way down the fender liner, some vehicles are equipped with parking cameras and sensors. Those are usually located right here. You want to go ahead and disconnect those while you have the fender liner pulled back. Our vehicle is not equipped with those, so we don't have to worry about that today. So let's get those 2 8 millimeter bolts off, and then we'll do the same thing on the driver's side. Something I wanted to mention now that we have those 2 8 mils out on the passenger side is that they are quite significantly longer than the rest of the hardware that we've pulled off today so far. So it should make it pretty easy when you go to reassemble everything to know, hey, where did those 2 long 8 millimeters go? Those mate the bumper to the fender inside the wheel liner. So just keep that in mind as you assort your hardware either on your table or on your magnetic tray like we are. All right, let's head over to the driver's side and do the exact same thing. All right, my good people, at this point we have the majority of the hardware for our bumper removed. So we're just going to go ahead and continue with the bumper removal process before we touch anything else. So to get the rest of the hardware off, we're going to have to remove this weather stripping up top. Either end was fine. You can just work it up and pull it off. You set this to the side real quick. All right, now that we have removed the weather stripping, we have access to 6 T30s that sit underneath that. We're going to go ahead and remove those, followed by 2 T25s on either end. And then another thing to look at on these bumpers, you're going to see 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those are 4 little metal tab body clips that you're going to want to make sure you line back up with the bumper when you reinstall it later, which we'll cover, of course. But Now at this point, we should be able to start working it off. The sides are disconnected. All the hardware on the bottom is removed. So now we just need to work the bumper off gently, get it off these clips as we do, and set it somewhere safe. The sides just pull down. You'll see there's 2 locating dowels on them. Same thing on the driver's side. Once you have those undone, you can start pulling the front off. It'll detach itself from those 4 metal clips, and there you have it. I'm gonna go ahead and set this somewhere safe, and then we'll pick it right back up. All right, now that we have the bumper removed, this vehicle is equipped with a carbon fiber strut brace, so we have to work on removing that. Some vehicles may not have that, which you can then skip to the next step. But for us, the next step is going to be to remove some plastic cowling on either end so we can access some of the hardware on the far end of our strut brace. To do that, we have a plastic rivet that we want to remove. Just using some pliers to kind of pull it up. You can use almost anything for this, even a flathead screwdriver. With that removed, I'll join them again, put them on my workbench. Now we've removed our plastic rivet. We have 3 10mm locking nuts up top that we want to take off. You can just use a 10mm socket. You just want to rotate them until they free up from the cowl. So as I spin it, I'll lift up. That's 1. There's 2. And number 3 was already undone for us. That's what it's going to look like. On the back, you can see they're just little locking tabs. Go ahead and set it to the side, and we'll do the same thing on the other side really quick. Great. With those removed, we have some weather stripping here that you just want to lift up once the bar comes up. For now, we'll leave it like this. And now we're going to grab our 13mm socket, and we have a total of 8 bolts to remove, and then we can work on taking the strut brace out. All right, I have my 13mm socket on the electric ratchet just to speed things up. We have 3 13mm bolts on the back side that we're going to remove, and then we'll work our way around. Those are our back 3. Then we have 2 more up front, again 13mm bolts that we want to tackle next. One thing to note before install, the most forward 2 13mm bolts are significantly shorter than the ones on the back side of the strut brace. So pretty straightforward, but just so you don't mix them up, it'd be kind of hard to put these long ones up front anyway, so just keep that in mind. And with that, we have 3 more 13s up back on the driver's side. And with that, all that we have left is 1 10mm bolt that attaches the strut brace to our expansion tank. So let's go ahead and remove that 10mm socket. And now at this point, we should be able to lift up our strut brace and slide it out of our engine bay. There we go. We're going to go ahead and set this to the side, and we'll pick it right back up. All right, my good people, next on our to-do list, we have some hardware to remove, as well as a clip to separate from our charge pipe. To start with that clip, that's going to be located right in the center of our radiator support. Now, as you can see, someone has been in here before. Ours is already loose. However, typically, these 2 tabs are clipped into here, and they kind of just help sturdy everything up. So we'll leave that for now. If you want, you can pull it off. It just has a locking tab here that slides in, and then you turn the rubber grommet into place. So we'll leave that off for now. Next, we're going to start on the driver's side and just work our way over to the passenger side. We have 2 13mm bolts on either end that we're going to want to remove. 13mm socket. While we have that socket on, we'll go ahead and do the 2 on the passenger side. All right, from there, we're going to grab our T30 bit, and we're going to work on removing the 4 T30s that hold both latches onto our radiator support. This is just going to kind of hang in place once we do pull this up. We might have to slide it over a bit to get it free, but it'll just sit there for now. Let's over to the passenger side and do the same thing. All right, from there we have a couple more T30s located underneath the ribbing here, so we're going to go ahead and give you a better angle so you can see those. We have 2 more T30s, one on either headlight that attach a small bracket from the support to the headlight. We're going to do the headlight one. One is located on the driver's side, and we have 1 more right here on our passenger side. So let's go ahead and tackle those next. And we have 1 on the driver's side. We have 2 T45s in the center here that also hold our support brace up front. Now, typically you have these 2 plastic caps on the end of the support. Inside of those, there's some expanding rivets that lock into the top of the radiator. Now, on our car, before we even touch them, you can see they are coming out. However, should yours be fixed into place properly, you would want to lift up the cap, squeeze the tab on either end of this tab right here. So it's got two small tabs that lock in the clip, and then you would lift up. So ours is already lifting up. I'm not going to worry about the other side, but when we put it back together, we'll make sure everything snaps into place. Now we can work this up while relieving our hinges from the support. All right, next we have this cowl to remove. On the passenger side and the driver's side, you will find two tabs that lock it into place. Simply push in on them and lift up as you do so. You can do this with your finger. We'll do the same thing on the driver's side. And we're going to push in and lift up the same way. And now with this cowl off, my good people, we are one step closer to getting this bad boy out of here. So let me set this to the side and then we'll get into it. Next, we want to work on removing this panel just so we have a little bit more room to pull out our unit here. So to do that, we want to get rid of this hood latch cable that runs through the top. There's two small clips that hold it into place. I like to just rotate them out of the way so that the line doesn't hook back into them by accident. Lift it up over the intake boot or intake tube here. Just tuck it in somewhere where it'll stay out of our way. Next, we have two T25s, one on either corner that we're going to want to remove. So let's go ahead and grab our T25 and do that. We have one up here that runs by the fan harness. Just sneak that T25 in there and you should be able to work it out. And then let's head over to the driver's side and do the same thing. Now with those removed, we're going to want to work on removing this panel. One thing to note, you'll see our car still has a charge pipe and it still has a fan shroud in place. It is recommended to remove them if you're going to be doing other work in this area. However, not super critical to take off just to take this top panel off. I'll tell you what I mean by that in a moment. To get this one off, if both of those units are still in place, you're going to want to lift up on it and slide it out. This panel is keyed into two tabs that come off of our fan shroud, which you can see up front here. One on the passenger side, one on the driver's side. So when you go to reinstall it, simply push it back a little bit. The plastic is flexible enough and the car's new enough where nothing's going to break, and you'll be able to squeeze these two tabs back into our panel here. Let's set this to the side. We'll get the car up a little bit more eye level and we'll work on disconnecting some coolant hoses. Now we're going to work on disconnecting our top hose that goes into our intercooler radiator. Same thing like we did with the auxiliary water pump. It's one of those quick disconnect lines. Quick. We'll grab our 90-degree angle pick. We'll pull that down and we'll work on separating it from this unit. In this case, this one came off pretty much all the way. I'm going to hang on to this. We'll put it back on during install. It's important to know I have a catch pan below the vehicle as well, as there will be some coolant that comes out of this, especially when we remove the radiator. That's nice and free. I've also gone ahead and as I pull on this unit a little bit, I've separated it from the clip that holds it in here. We're going to want to go ahead and do the same thing on the driver's side. Kind of just pulling it towards me while I push back the AC and radiator combo. All right. And same thing on the driver's side. I'm kind of pushing back on the AC condenser and radiator very gently, of course, while I pull out our heat exchanger here. I should free it up enough that it won't go back in. And now it's just a matter of working up the unit so that we can access the lower hose. All right, at this point, I have a decent enough view of the top clip for the other hose. I'm gonna go ahead and separate those now. And then we should be able to finally do what we've been trying to do this whole time, get this bad boy out of here. And now that we have that line off, we're gonna go ahead and work this unit out of place. Obviously being gentle with it in case you were gonna reuse this, and being gentle with our AC condenser so we don't damage any of the fins. So let's go ahead and slide this out. Again, some coolant may come out of the intercooler radiator here, so just be prepared for that. Woo! Look at that, baby. My good people, what we have been working for this whole time, 3,675 pieces of hardware later, it's finally out. Let me set this to the side. Let me drain the coolant out of it. We'll grab our new CSF unit, get it ready for install, and go from there. Also, one thing to note, if your car has a little bit more mileage than this one per se, this whole general area may be a little bit cluttered. Now would be a good time to take some compressed air or a vacuum and just remove any loose debris that may be in here, leaves, dead bugs. You know the drill. We're going to clean up our area, we'll grab our CSF unit, and we'll get ready for install. Before we install the new CSF unit in the car, we want to go ahead and install the rock guard that they supply to us. So that and the hardware. Starting with the hardware, we'll install the clips first. You want to make sure the threaded portion is facing the fins. So just slide all 4 in. They kind of lock into place, which is really nice. All right, once we have our nut retaining clips on, we can go ahead and take our grate, slide that over the top. And then for this application, we're not going to be using the spacers included. We have our 4 10mm bolts that we're going to start by hand. With those on and this nice and even, we can go ahead and take our 10mm socket on our ratchet and just tighten them down gently. All right, now with that situated, let's head over to the car and actually put this thing in. All right, now we can go ahead and get our CSF unit ready to go in. We're going to, same thing as we did before, push back a little bit gently on this setup here. We don't really need to touch this too much. We'll work on getting it close enough to the lower hose so we can connect that one first. Then we'll slide it in the rest of the way and we'll work on the upper hose. What I'm doing here at the same time as this goes in is I'm pulling back a little bit on the plastic ducting that sits underneath the crash bar just to clear the 10mm bolts. That's what's hanging us up here. So just keep that in mind. You might need to do that as you slide yours in. So what I'm doing here is with my left hand underneath the crash bar, I'm grabbing the radiator hose and just kind of making sure it stays up as much as possible. So that when this gets a little bit closer, I can work on hooking it up to that bottom fitting. Then we'll snug it in all the way and get that top one. All right, one thing to note, my good people, with the CSF unit being obviously a lot more capable than the stock unit we took out, it's not so much wider, but it is a lot thicker than the old unit, making it for a very tight fit in between our AC condenser and radiator and our front support here. So what I recommend is we're going to remove the crash bar. We have 2 13mm bolts underneath the front of each headlight. And then we're going to get to the hardware that holds our brace in place. And we're just going to loosen it a little bit just to give us a little bit of wiggle room. Then once we have this situated into place, we'll sandwich everything back together. So 2 13mm bolts. Here's one under our ambient air temp sensor. Just know as you remove this hardware, the bottom retaining clip with the threads will fall down, so you want to grab that. It's a very tight fit for the outer hardware underneath the headlights, so you kind of have to work at an angle. And this will just pull forward. Now we have access to the T45s that hold this front brace in place. We have 2 below, which I already loosened. We have 2 in the middle by our frame rails. We'll go ahead and just loosen them up a little bit. And then that should allow us a little bit more wiggle room in this whole situation to work our new intercooler down. All right, as we get this closer into where it needs to go, we can now work on hooking up our hoses. All right, once we have that on, we should be able to lock this in. And that's nice and secure. Feel free to pry back on it a little bit, but that's not going anywhere. While I have you here, we'll hook up the top one as well. Upper hose. That's good there. And with that hose on, just like we did with the bottom, we can kind of pry it a little bit, make sure it's not going to come off. And we want to make sure both ends are fed into the radiator brackets that the old one was on. Check our flashlight, make sure the bottom's situated correctly. Yep. We have one corner up top here, one buried below that you can't see. We have our top one up here, and if you peer down below, you'll see the second one locked in right underneath the lower hose. All right, now that we have this bad boy in, we're going to go ahead and snug up this front brace again. 2 T45s on either side. Let's go ahead and snug them up. With those in, now we can install our crash bar. With the crash bar back in place, we can work on feeding our hardware back in, as well as the bracket underneath that holds said hardware. And down below, hold our bracket up to it and start both of them by hand. before we tighten those down, we'll head over to the passenger side and do the same thing. All right, with our crash rod back on, we're going to go ahead and torque down our 4 13mm bolts to 25 Newton meters. So let's go ahead and do that. There's 2. Now we have everything secured again, we're going to go ahead and bring the car eye level, start with our panel, and work our way backwards. All right, to install our cover, like I mentioned earlier, we're going to kind of get it into place. And we're going to push back a bit on our fan shroud assembly. We can take our hood latch cable, run it through the front again, just clip it into place. And now we can grab our 2 T25s that go on either end and get those started. Also, one more thing to note, this panel does lock in underneath this plastic here. You can see it's kind of raised. It just kind of keys in. You want to make sure it keys in before you start your 2 T25s so it doesn't flap up in the wind. Sorry about my hands blocking the view. This harness kind of fights the hardware a little bit as you get it started, so I kind of have to help the ratchet stay on the T25 screw while I get it going. All right, just snug it up. Just gonna go ahead and leave it nice and snug. It's going into plastic, so it doesn't need to be torqued a whole lot. Now let's do the driver's side. With those 2 situated, now we can reinstall this top cowl piece. Make sure you feed this bracket through the opening right here. And then like we did earlier, we have 2 tabs on either end. Just push it on. And it's locked into place. All right, now we have that cover on. We can grab our radiator support and feed that on. While we do that, we want to be mindful of the 2 plastic tabs that we left on either end. And we also want to be mindful of feeding our hood latches. There's 2 ends that go over this, so we'll do those at the same time. Now we can make sure that these rubber grommets are actually where they need to go. Nice and flush into our radiator. There's 2. Now since these are moving around a bit, I'm going to go ahead and start with the hood latches on both ends, and then we'll move on to the rest of the hardware. All right, with those lined up, let's head over to the driver's side and do the same thing. While I have you in this corner, we'll thread in the 2 13mm bolts by hand, as well as our T25 that goes into the headlight. T25 here. Then moving along, we'll work with our T30s as well as our T45s that go here in the middle. 2 T45s in the middle. Remember, those go into our front brace, the one that we loosened up earlier to get the CSF unit in, since it's such a thick one.
Damn, boy, he's thick, boy!
T25. All right, I'm going to start with the T30, work my way around the latches, meet them in the middle, and then we're basically going to snug everything down first, and then we'll go ahead and torque everything down. I'm going to start now with everything hand started. I'll start with the latches, work my way around to the other side, and then we'll go ahead and snug down the 13s, the T45s, the T25s, and then we'll torque the whole thing down. All right, we have our 2 13s up top. We're going to start on the driver's side, then we'll work over to the passenger side, nice and light. While I have you here, we'll work on our T25. These we're just going to do by hand and snug them in gently. Let's head over to the driver's side and do the same thing. With those handled, now we have our 2 T45s in the middle, and then we'll also do our clip that goes to our charge pipe. Let's switch over to those. Now that we have most of our hardware situated, we're going to go ahead and torque them all down to 28 Newton meters. So let's do it. These hood latch ones we're going to keep at 20. Same thing with our T30s against our shrouding here. We'll keep those, because they're going into small clips, into 210 Newton meters. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4 T30s that are going to go to 10 Newton meters. We have our 2 T45s. Those will torque to 28. We have 2 more 13s. These will be torqued to 28 as well. And we have 4 more T30s, which will torque to 20 Newton meters. And now with that situated, we're going to reinstall our rubber bushing that has a small clip that goes to our charge pipe. It's going to key in one way. And then the rubber bushing itself, you're going to want to turn it 90 degrees to lock in. And then this, you're gonna simply pop it up and boom, baby, that's locked in. Now with our strut brace, we can go ahead and feed this back into place. We have two 13mm bolts that go up front. Remember, those were the two shorter ones that I mentioned at the beginning. We'll just get those started by hand. Then I'll head over to the passenger side. We have three more 13mm bolts. These are a little bit longer. 3. You can also use the old marks that are left behind on the brace as reference as to how it was aligned, should you want to align it the exact same way it came off. All right, we'll leave that loose for now. Head over to the driver's side. And now with that situated, we can grab our 10mm bolt and we can thread that back into our expansion tank. This one we're just going to snug up gently by hand using the old calibrated wrist. Now that we have our strut brace in place, we have it lined up the way we want. We're going to take our 13mm socket on our electric ratchet. We're going to snug down everything really quickly, and then we'll go around and torque them all to 28 Newton meters. 28 Newton meters for all 8 13mm bolts. Alrighty, with that situated, we're going to grab our 2 cowl pieces and we'll go ahead and get those back in place as well. All right, we'll go ahead and get these started. Again, don't forget, these have locking tabs that you're going to rotate. A little bit hard to see on camera, but the nuts do have arrows, and so does the cowl. So once you have it in place, you want to make sure the arrows are facing each other. That way you know it's locked. We're all going to take a quarter turn, much better. And then we have a plastic rivet on the end, if you remember at the beginning. Beautiful. At this point, we're ready to get our bumper mounted back onto the vehicle. So with the help of my good friend Mike behind the camera, together we're going to go ahead, bring it over. He's going to work on the passenger side, I'll work on the driver's side, and our main goal is going to be to slide it into place, hit those 4 clips I pointed out at the beginning, as well as those 2 locating dowel pins on either end that feed back into the fender. So let's do it. All right, now that we have the bumper cover situated on, we're going to start with the hardware up top. We'll work our way around. So I'm going to have my 2 T25s that go on either corner that thread into the headlight, and we'll start with those. We'll use the markings from the hardware before we took off the bumper to kind of line everything up and just go to it. And now that both T25s are situated, I'm going to grab my T30s and we'll go ahead and start with those. All right, we have 6 T30s that go up top here. Just going to use a small screwdriver to make sure all my clips are lined up properly. Some of them may have moved as we put the bumper on. So far, everything is lining up beautifully where the hardware used to be, so that's a good sign. I'm going to use the electric ratchet just to snug all of these down. With that back on, we can reinstall our rubber weather stripping. You want to feed the ends first underneath the fenders as they were tucked in a little bit. And then the whole line of the car has a small ridge that feeds into the weather stripping. Just like your door weather stripping, pretty standard. Or door seals, I should say. All right, with that situated, aside from filling the cooling system, which we'll do at the end, that buttons up everything up top here. So let's raise the car up. We'll work on the fender liners and then we'll work our way underneath. All right, working on the driver's side first, we're gonna make sure that our 2 dowels line up into our fender. Should look something like that. We'll grab our 2 8mm bolts. These are the 2 longer ones that go up here. So I'm going to try to hold that with one hand while I start the hardware with the other. I apologize in advance if the view is a little tight, but snug that one up just a bit, enough to get the other one started. All right. With those buttoned up, we can take the opportunity to install 2 out of the 3 8mm bolts that go in our fender liner. At this point, we're going to start dipping into the, I'll call it the stock size, the size that everything else is. So we'll start with these 2 over here. One up top here. We have one right here. And now with that done, we're going to replicate the exact same thing on the passenger side. So let me blow through that real quick, and then we'll catch back up in a moment. With that situated, I'm gonna raise the car all the way up, and then we'll start with the stiffening plate and then work to the surrounding areas or splash shields, all that good stuff. Now we're gonna go ahead and install our stiffening plate. We do recommend you replace the hardware whenever you remove this. Again, you could argue that this didn't have to come out. However, with the way that the coolant exited the auxiliary water pump, it would have just coated this whole tray had we left it on. So your choice, should you want to remove it. There's a link in the description below for that hardware. So we'll get that situated. I'll use 1 or 2 bolts to get it started, and then we'll go ahead and we'll torque all of them down. We're gonna take our 16 mil on the ratchet, snug all 8 16 millimeter bolts up, then we'll go around and torque them all down to 56 Newton meters plus 90 degrees. These are torque to yield bolts, which is why you wanna replace them. All right, now this torque wrench has angle mode, so we'll go ahead and use that. However, should you not have that at home, simply make a mark on the skid plate, make a mark on the bolt, and just make sure you rotate it about 90 degrees. You should be in good shape. All right, we have our torque wrench set to 90 degrees. With that situated, we're gonna grab our 8 millimeter hardware, which you already know we have a lot of. We'll get those all started on our skid plate and then work our way to our middle shield and our chops. All right, from here, we'll start with our 9 8 millimeters around the stiffening plate. Now we can take our center skid plate and get that fitted into place. Just a reminder of the front, we're gonna hang on to the hardware for a moment until we get our lip back in place. We had 2 13s, one on either end of this shield. Snug these up with the electric ratchet. We'll snug up our 13s with the ratchet as well. With those situated, we can now grab our side chops. I'm gonna start on the driver's side one. Don't forget that this end feeds in behind the fender liner. That's that last 8 millimeter that we didn't put in earlier, as well as the other 2. Right now we're gonna go ahead and reinstall our carbon fiber lip. We'll start with some of the correct 8 millimeter hardware and then work our way around to the not so correct Phillips heads that are holding this in. Now with everything buttoned up underneath the car, let's get it back on the ground. We'll hop up top, we'll fill the system with some coolant, and we'll show you how to initiate the bleeding procedure. With the car back on the ground, we have a funnel situated in our expansion tank. We're gonna go ahead and start filling the system. We have some concentrated BMW coolant, and we also have some distilled water that we borrowed from Motorsports. With the system topped off as much as it'll take currently, we're gonna rest the cap on top of it. We're gonna hop inside the car and initiate the self-bleeding procedure, so let's go ahead and do that. All right, inside the car now, I decided to put the cap on the expansion tank. We've closed the hood, we've hopped in. Now BMW recommends you have a battery charger or tender on the vehicle. This car actually has a brand new battery, so I think we'll be okay, as the process only runs about 11 minutes. So in the vehicle, we're gonna go ahead and hit the start-stop button once. From there, we're gonna turn on our low beam lights. At that point, we wanna go ahead and make sure our heat is set to the highest setting, but the fan speed can stay at the lowest setting. And then we're gonna go ahead and put our foot on the gas pedal, hold that down for about 6 to 10 seconds. The electric pump will actuate, and then it's gonna run for about 11 minutes. After that is done, you're gonna wanna make sure to check the level in the expansion tank and top it off as needed. Otherwise, my good people, that is gonna conclude this CSF upgrade on this F82. Overall, a pretty straightforward job, a lot of 8 millimeter hardware, but definitely a doable job at home. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments on what we did today, leave them in the comment box below. And if you like this DIY and you wanna see more like them, please consider subscribing. We make new ones all the time. As always, thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you on the next one.